He's just a diner waiter, my son-in-law Ethan announced to the wedding guests, pointing at me with a disdainful sneer. The guests murmured in response, but when someone exclaimed, "My God, that's Arthur Miller," I saw Ethan's champagne flute slip from his hand. That one moment changed everything. The embossed invitation arrived in a creamy white envelope that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. It was addressed to Mr. Arthur Miller, my name, but it felt foreign and out of place among the usual bills and junk mail. I ran my thumb over the gold leaf lettering that announced the marriage of Chloe Miller and Ethan Thorne. A quiet smile spread across my face. My little girl was getting married. I remember teaching her to tie her shoes in the backyard, her tiny hands fumbling with the laces. Now she was a brilliant, successful woman in her own right, ready to start a new chapter. I was so incredibly proud of her. But even as I felt that warmth, a faint chill of unease settled in. I had met Ethan, of course, a handful of times, but our interactions had always been strained. He was a successful hedge fund manager, all sharp suits and sharper words. He saw the world in dollar signs, a stark contrast to my world of coffee stains, diner chatter, and the simple satisfaction of a hard day's work. The drive to their lavish home in Hinsdale, a prestigious suburb of Chicago, was a journey between two different planets. My old sedan, a faithful companion for over a decade, felt small and out of place alongside the luxury cars that lined the manicured streets. I clutched the steering wheel, trying to calm the nervous flutter in my stomach. This was for Chloe, I reminded myself. This was about being there for my daughter. When I stepped into their home, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and new money. The foyer was a cavern of marble and glass, all cold surfaces and minimalist art. It felt more like a museum than a home. Chloe rushed to me, her smile a beacon of warmth in the sterile space. "Dad, you made it," she said, embracing me tightly. Her hug was the only real thing I felt there. Ethan emerged from the living room, a half-smile plastered on his face. He extended a hand, his grip firm and calculated. "Arthur," he said, his eyes scanning my clothes with a subtle yet unmistakable look of disapproval. "Glad you could make it." The conversation at dinner, held in a dining room where the chairs looked more like art than furniture, was a painful exercise in social maneuvering. Ethan talked at length about his connections and market predictions, using a language designed to intimidate and exclude. He never asked about my day, about the diner, about the people I served. To him, my life simply didn't exist. He spoke of his colleagues, influential people he considered peers. And then he turned to me, a glint of challenge in his eyes. "So, Arthur," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I know this must all be very different for you. Tell me, do you ever get tired of serving people?" Ethan's voice cut through the polite dinner conversation, a sudden, sharp intrusion. "Honestly, Arthur, I don't want to beat around the bush," he said, setting his fork down with a deliberate clink. My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. Our wedding is a business event as much as it is a celebration. The people we're inviting, they're not just friends. They're CEOs, investors, city officials, people whose presence there is an investment in our future. He paused, taking a slow sip of his water, his eyes never leaving mine. Your presence, while appreciated from a family standpoint, would be problematic. The word hung in the air like a noxious gas. Problematic. As if I were a loose screw, a flaw in his meticulously planned facade. A quiet rage began to simmer deep inside me, but I kept my voice steady, calm. "I don't understand, Ethan. I'm Chloe's father." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "And I respect that. But you have to be realistic. You're a diner waiter. Our guests operate in a world of private jets and nine-figure deals. They might see you and see a handout, or worse, a charity case." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if letting me in on a secret. "This wedding is an investment, Arthur. I can't risk my professional reputation for the sake of misplaced sentimentality. It's just not practical." I looked over at Chloe. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes pleaded with me, a silent apology for her husband's cruelty. But she didn't speak. She didn't defend me. And in that moment, The pain of her silence was sharper than any of Ethan's cutting words. With a finality that brooked no argument, Ethan delivered his verdict. I need you to understand this, Arthur. I won't have you at the wedding. I stood, the chair scraping against the marble floor like a scream. The coldness in my chest spread to my hands, which trembled slightly as I picked up the small gift I had brought for them, a framed photograph of me, Chloe, and her mother on their first day of school. I couldn't bring myself to give it to them now. I understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned and walked out of the room without another word, without looking back. The drive home was a blur. The opulent homes of Hinsdale seemed to mock me, their perfectly manicured lawns and gleaming windows a testament to a world I would never belong to. When I finally reached my small apartment in Chicago, the silence was deafening. The phone rang, and I already knew who it was. Dad? Chloe's voice was thick with tears. I am so sorry. I tried to talk to him, but he's just not listening. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, though my heart was breaking. It's not your fault. But I knew it was. Her silence at the dinner table had spoken volumes. I'm so ashamed of him, of me, she sobbed. I don't know what to do. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and it broke my heart all over again. All I wanted was to protect her, to be there for her. But Ethan had made it clear that my love for my daughter was a liability, a weakness he intended to exploit. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my small apartment, a space filled with memories of a life I had built with love and hard work, a life he saw as nothing more than a failure, a life he had just banned from my own daughter's wedding. The night was long and restless. I sat in my small apartment, the framed photo of Chloe, her mother, and me staring back at me from the mantelpiece. Ethan's words echoed in my mind. Just a diner waiter. He didn't see the man who worked double shifts to put his daughter through college. He didn't see the father who chose a steady paycheck over uncertain fame, who traded the spotlight for the quiet joy of watching his child grow up. He saw a man unworthy of his company, a problem to be discarded. The pain of it was a dull ache, but underneath it, a stubborn resolve began to form. I couldn't accept his verdict. Not for myself, but for Chloe. She needed her father there. I had to be a witness to her happiness, a silent supporter on the most important day of her life. My dignity was not a luxury I could afford to prioritize over my daughter's need for her father's presence. But how could I get in? Ethan had made it clear I was persona non grata. And then a thought, a wild, reckless idea took hold. I would go to the wedding not as a guest, but as staff, as a waiter. The next morning I drove to the Grand Central Diner, the place that had been my second home for 2 decades. The familiar scent of coffee and sizzling bacon was a comfort. Dmitry Petrova, my boss and friend, was behind the counter, his weathered hands wiping down the surface with a practiced rhythm. Dmitry, a man with a stern face and a kind heart, had immigrated to the U.S. years ago and built his business from the ground up, much like I had built my life with honest work. He understood what it meant to fight for what was yours. You're not on the schedule, Arthur, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. What troubles you, my friend? I slid onto a stool and told him everything. I recounted Ethan's words, his condescension, his cold dismissal, the pain, the shame, and my daughter's quiet tears. Dmitry listened without a word, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he put down his rag, his hands clenched into fists. This man, he shames you for honest work, for being a good father? This is not right, Arthur. I took a deep breath. Dmitry, I need a favor. I need you to hire me to work their wedding, just for that one day. Dmitry stared at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. You want to serve drinks at your own daughter's wedding? Arthur, this is insane. It's the only way, I insisted. Ethan can't ban a waiter from working his event. I'll be invisible, just part of the background. But I'll be there. I'll be there to see Chloe walk down the aisle. I'll be there when she says her vows. Dmitry shook his head slowly, a deep sadness in his eyes. A father should sit in the front row, not carry a tray of glasses. This is a cruel thing you are asking. Sometimes we don't get what should be, I said, my voice heavy. We just take what we can get. and what I want is to be there for my daughter." Dmitri was silent for a long moment, contemplating. He knew my pride, my stubbornness, and my deep love for Chloe. "Okay, Arthur," he finally said, his voice firm with resolve. "I know the caterer for their event, a man named Sergei. We have a history. I'll make a call. You will work that wedding." A wave of relief washed over me so profound I had to close my eyes. Dimitri's friendship was a lifeline, a testament that some battles are not fought alone. "Thank you, Dmitri. I won't forget this." "Don't thank me yet," he said, the gruffness returning to his voice. "Men like Ethan, they do not give up easily. He will not be happy, and he will fight back. You must be prepared." Dimitri's words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. He will not be happy, and he will fight back. I believed him. Men like Ethan, accustomed to getting their way, would not take no for an answer. My fears were confirmed a few days later when a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the diner. Ethan, looking far too important for a lunch break, walked in, his expensive suit a jarring contrast to the checkered floor and red vinyl booths. Dmitri met him at the door, his face a mask of professional politeness. I stayed in the back, pretending to organize menus, but my ears were straining to catch every word. "Dmitri, is it?" Ethan began, his voice smooth and condescending. "My name is Ethan Thorne. I believe you're a friend of Arthur Miller?" "He is one of my most respected employees," Dmitri replied, his voice calm and steady. Ethan chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Yes. Well, about that, I'm afraid I have a situation. Arthur seems to have gotten the rather misguided idea that he's going to work my wedding. Arthur is a professional. He will be an excellent addition to the catering team," Dmitri stated, his tone unwavering. Ethan's smile hardened. "Let's be direct, shall we? I will offer you $5,000 in cash to fire Arthur. Effective immediately. He is not to set foot in my venue." My blood ran cold. $5,000. It was more than I made in 2 months. It was a king's ransom for a man struggling to keep a small business afloat in a tough economy. I watched Dimitri's face, my stomach twisting with guilt and fear. He could take the money. It would be an understandable choice, a sensible choice. But Dmitri, my old friend, just shook his head. "Mr. Thorne, principles are not for sale. Arthur will work your wedding. That is final." Ethan's face went crimson. The mask of civility finally cracked. "You think you can defy me? I know people. People in city government, people who handle health inspections, liquor licenses. You have a lovely little business here, Dmitri. It would be a shame if something happened to it." Dimitri's eyes flashed, his Slavic accent becoming more pronounced with his anger. "Threats? I have survived more than a man in a fancy suit can imagine. Let him try. I have friends, too. Friends who understand loyalty." Ethan stood his ground for a moment longer, his chest heaving, before turning and storming out of the diner. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a tense silence in its wake. Dmitri walked over to me, his hands still trembling slightly. "This man is a sickness, Arthur. He will do anything to get his way." The confrontation only solidified my resolve. With Dimitri's help, we made arrangements with the caterer, Sergei, a friend of Dimitri's from the old country. My name would be added to the official staff list. I would have a uniform. I would be a ghost at the wedding, a silent observer in my daughter's most important moments. Dmitri laid out the plan in painstaking detail. "You will show up at the venue with the other staff, no special treatment. You will do your job, no more, no less. You must be invisible. No one, especially not Ethan, must know that you are there for any reason other than to serve food." I nodded, feeling a mix of dread and determination. The uniform, a simple white shirt, black pants, and a black vest, was more than just clothing. It was a disguise. It was my armor. It would allow me to be present for Chloe, while protecting me from Ethan's venom. As I walked home that evening, the Chicago skyline stretched out before me, a symbol of endless possibilities. I was no longer a victim. I was a father on a... The grand ballroom of the Chicago Plaza Hotel was a testament to opulence. White roses cascaded from tall centerpieces, their petals catching the soft light of crystal chandeliers. I moved through this splendor, a tray of champagne flutes in my hands, a ghost in my daughter's wedding. The uniform, a crisp white shirt and a black vest, was my disguise. It allowed me to blend in, to be a silent witness to a day I had been forbidden to attend. I watched as guests arrived in a blur of designer gowns and expensive suits. Tech executives, venture capitalists, and city officials. Ethan's world, a world where money and influence were the only things that mattered. They laughed and chatted, their conversations a whirlwind of market trends and political gossip. I moved silently among them, offering champagne, my face a mask of professional politeness. No one saw me. I was a part of the scenery, a functionary who made their lives more comfortable without ever being truly seen. From across the room I caught sight of Chloe. She looked radiant in her wedding dress, her face a mix of joy and nervousness. My heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. This was my little girl, the woman I had sacrificed everything for. And now, I was here, in the shadows, to witness her happiness. Ethan stood beside her, a beacon of confidence. He smiled and shook hands with his guests, a man in his element, a conqueror in his new kingdom. But every now and then his eyes would dart across the room, searching for a sign of me, a sign of the one person he couldn't control. As the dinner concluded, the room fell quiet, and Ethan stood, tapping a silver spoon against his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the ballroom, "thank you all for sharing this incredible evening with Sophia and me." My hands, which had been steady all evening, trembled slightly. This was it, the toast, the moment I had been dreading. "Success in life comes from understanding your place," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "We've invited people tonight who represent excellence, achievement, the very best of what our society offers." He paused, his eyes finding mine across the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. He was going to do it. He was going to publicly humiliate me. "And it's important," he continued, his voice gaining a cruel edge, "to acknowledge different levels of contribution. Not everyone reaches the same heights. Take this man, for instance." He gestured a hand directly at me, and every head in the room turned. "Arthur Miller. He's just a diner waiter. Never amounted to anything significant. Never built anything lasting. A man who peaked in his 20s and has spent 40 years sliding downward." The champagne flute on my tray rattled, but I kept my composure, my face a blank slate. Chloe's face was white with shock, her eyes wide with horror. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Ethan, emboldened by the silent attention, continued his tirade. "He wants to be part of this celebration, but the truth is, there are makers and there are servers, leaders and followers, people who matter, and people who simply exist to facilitate the lives of those who do." I set the champagne bottle on the nearest table with careful precision. The rage that had been simmering inside me was now a roaring fire, but I refused to let it show. I would not let him break me. Not here. Not in front of my daughter. Ethan's cruel words had achieved their purpose, establishing his dominance and demonstrating his power to humiliate without consequence. The room was silent, a heavy, uncomfortable quiet hanging in the air. I stood perfectly still, my serving tray a shield between me and the crowd, my face an empty canvas. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I would not let his cruelty tarnish my daughter's special day. Then, a voice from a corner table, loud and full of recognition, cut through the tension. "Wait a minute. Is that him?" A young man with glasses, who had been scrolling on his phone, suddenly looked up at a television screen above the bar. The screen, which had been playing classic Hollywood films, was now showing a clip of an old black-and-white movie. The young man's eyes darted between the screen and me, his phone screen glowing with a search result. He gasped, standing up in his excitement. "My God, that's Arthur Miller, the actor!" The words rippled through the room like a shockwave. Heads turned, first to the television, then to me, the quiet waiter standing with a tray of empty glasses. The guests, who a moment ago had been listening to Ethan's condescending speech, now looked at me with confusion, then dawning recognition. Another guest, an elderly woman in a shimmering gown, peered over her glasses. I remember that film. He was wonderful. The way he spoke, such a natural presence. The young man held up his phone, his voice clear and confident. 7 major films between 1988 and 1995. A Golden Globe nomination for Midnight Sky. He was a huge star for a few years, and then he just vanished. The whispers spread like wildfire. Guests pulled out their phones, frantically searching for my name. The elegant wedding reception was transforming into a spectacle of discovery. Ethan, who had been standing with a smug, victorious look, now stared at me with a face drained of all color. The name, Arthur Miller, the name he had so cruelly used to mock me, was now a name of respect, of fame. The man he had dismissed as a nobody was now the most interesting person in the room. His perfect world was crumbling. "This is impossible," Ethan stammered, his voice thin and hollow. "He's a waiter. He drives a sedan. He lives in a tiny apartment." I looked at him, and for the first time all evening, I felt not anger but pity. He had judged me by my circumstances, but the people in the room, seeing my past, were now judging him by his character. Then I saw Chloe. She was standing at the head table, her face streaked with tears. Not tears of shame, but of a profound, heartbreaking realization. She wasn't seeing the waiter anymore. She was seeing the man who had given up the spotlight, the man who had traded fame for a quiet life so he could give her a better one. She pushed back her chair and began walking toward me, her wedding dress rustling against the tables. The crowd parted, creating a path for her, a path that led her away from the shattered remnants of Ethan's pride and toward the man she now truly saw for the first time. When she reached me, she didn't say a word. She just wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. Her quiet sobs were a sound I hadn't heard since she was a little girl. "Dad," she whispered, her voice broken, "why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because it wasn't important, sweetheart," I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. What was important was you. I had come here to be a witness to her happiness. Instead, I had become a witness to a much more profound moment. The moment my daughter finally understood the truth about her father's love. Chloe's arms tightened around me, her quiet sobs a melody of heartbreak and love. My own heart, which had felt so bruised and battered just moments ago, began to heal. I held her, a father holding his daughter on her wedding day, exactly as it should have been. The crowd around us, a sea of bewildered faces and glowing phone screens, seemed to fade away. All that mattered was this moment, this reconciliation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look at my face, her eyes red and glistening with tears. "I should have known something was wrong. I should have stood up for you." I wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're here now, sweetheart. That's all that matters. You're my daughter, and I'm so proud of you. All of this, my past, it's just background noise. The only thing that ever mattered was you." "Oh." Her head rested on my chest, and I could feel her heart beating in rhythm with my own. The love in that moment was so pure, so overwhelming, that it washed away all the pain and bitterness of the past few days. I was not a waiter, and I was not a famous actor. I was just a father, and that was the greatest role I had ever played. Then a voice, tentative and filled with genuine shame, broke the silence. "Arthur?" We both looked up. Ethan stood before us, his posture slumped, his face pale with humiliation. The mask of arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability I had never seen before. The man who had so effortlessly commanded a room was now a shadow of his former self, a boy caught doing something terrible. "Arthur, I don't know what to say. There is no excuse for what I did. I was a fool, a coward." He looked at the crowd, then back at me. "I was so worried about what they would think of me, about how you would make me look. I was so threatened by the love you and Chloe share, a love I never knew, that I tried to make you seem small. But you're not small. You're magnificent." His voice cracked on the last word. The man who had judged me for my lack of ambition was now admitting his own profound failure of character. It was a victory, but it felt hollow. I didn't want to see him humbled. I just wanted my daughter to be happy. "I'm sorry, Arthur. I'm so incredibly sorry," he said again, his hands shaking. "I have no right to ask this, but can you ever forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, her eyes filled with hope. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give him for myself. It was something I had to do for her. Michael, I said, using the name he had gone by before I started calling him Ethan. A man's character isn't defined by a single mistake, but by what he does after he makes it. I think you have a lot of work to do, but for Chloe's sake, we can start over. I extended my hand. He took it, grasping it with a force that was no longer about dominance, but about genuine gratitude and relief. In that moment, the wedding, which had begun as a spectacle of wealth and social climbing, transformed into something real, something honest. It was no longer about money or status. It was about family. Chloe stepped forward and wrapped her arms around both of us, creating a circle of reconciliation that had seemed impossible just an hour earlier. Tears of joy streamed down her face. "I love you both," she said. The room, which had been holding its breath, erupted in applause, but this time it was different. This was not the polite recognition of social obligation. It was a genuine celebration of a new beginning. The applause was deafening. It was the sound of a room full of strangers celebrating not a show of power, but a display of genuine human emotion. Chloe, still wrapped in my arms, looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears of relief and love. "Would you honor me with a father-daughter dance?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. She nodded, a radiant smile returning to her face. "Always, Dad." As the orchestra began a soft, beautiful waltz, I led Chloe onto the dance floor. It wasn't a dance of social obligation or performance. It was a dance of healing, of forgiveness, of a father and daughter reconnecting after a long, painful separation. I held her close, feeling the expensive fabric of her wedding dress against my old, simple uniform. The world melted away. The crystal chandeliers, the elegant guests, the grandeur of the hotel, none of it mattered. In this moment, with my daughter in my arms, I was the richest man in the world. I wasn't an actor, and I wasn't a waiter. I was a father, and that was the only title that had ever truly mattered to me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Ethan watching us. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful expression. He had seen the truth, and it had humbled him. He wasn't just my son-in-law. He was a man who had made a choice, a terrible choice, and was now faced with the consequences of that choice. But for Chloe, he was trying to be better. And for her, I would be willing to give him that chance. When the music ended, I kissed Chloe's forehead. "I hope you'll be happy, sweetheart," I said, my voice full of a love that had never wavered. "I will, Dad," she said, her smile full of promise. "Because I have you." I watched as she returned to Ethan, who met her with a newfound respect and a genuine smile. He had learned a difficult but necessary lesson. The battle was over. The victory, however, felt less like triumph and more like a profound, bittersweet peace. I had won back my place in my daughter's life, but I had to fight to do it. I walked to the quiet corner where Dmitri was waiting for me. "You did it, Arthur," he said, his weathered face beaming with pride. "You showed them all. You're a magnificent man." I smiled at him. "No, my friend. I just showed them what matters. Money comes and goes, but family is everything." I returned to my simple life, to my small apartment, and to the Grand Central Diner. But my world was different now. The silence in my home was no longer lonely, but peaceful. The work in the diner was no longer a disguise, but a choice, a quiet reminder of a life I had built with integrity and love. My story had become something bigger than myself. It had become a lesson for others. A reminder that age doesn't make you weak, and money doesn't define your worth. The greatest success isn't measured in dollar signs or headlines, but in the love and respect you earn from the people who truly matter. It's a story about a father who chose family over fame, and found that true dignity has nothing to do with what you do for a living, but everything to do with who you are.